Well, I finally finished it. I told you all at the end of my Legacy of Kain Defiance Remastered review that I bought the deluxe edition and would be playing Ascendance when it finally dropped. And I realize that was at the end of last month, and here it is pushing into the second half of April, so why did it take me so long? Part of it is just having a life outside of making videos for this channel and having a busy work schedule in the real world. The other part, though, is that I had to force myself to play it because it just wasn't great. I don't mean not great, as in playing something that just didn't meet expectations and was sort of a letdown. Myself and many others had been waiting for a new entry in the series for over 20 years, and anything less than a conclusive story that wrapped up the saga was going to be disappointing. When it turned out that we were getting a game that was connected to a Kickstarter prequel comic that, despite making a buttload of money, was almost universally panned by readers, my heart sank. Now, I almost found a video online to watch about the comic so I could read it myself, but then I found out that the game is essentially just a video game version of the comic, and thus it wasn't really necessary. Suffice it to say, my expectations were low enough that even James Cameron wouldn't be able to dive deep enough to lift them.
His name is James Cameron, the bravest pioneer. No budget too steep, no sea too deep. Who's that? It's him, James Cameron.
So, did Ascendance live up to my incredibly low expectations? I suppose that's one way of describing it. I'm not sure if it being worse than I imagined it to be counts as living up to or exceeding, though I guess it's all about how you look at it, and I really don't want to look at it ever again. In fact, the second the credits finished rolling and it rolled back around to the title screen, I promptly uninstalled it and began playing the remaster of Soul Reaver 1 as a palate cleanser, and to remember when I wasn't grieving for the series. Look, I know I usually try to be somewhat nuanced in how I look at games. I try my best to find the good in whatever game I'm playing and try to be as good faith as I can be, especially when it comes to titles that get plagued with controversy or have mixed reviews. I don't usually have the opinion that a game is just irredeemable garbage that deserves to have the dev team sent to the gulag. For the first time, though, I'm starting to think that Fred Armisen's character from Parks and Rec had the right idea.
This kind of behavior is never tolerated in Boracua. They put you in jail right away. No trial, no nothing. Right to jail, right away.
Legacy of Kain Ascendance is probably the most miserable, detestable, loathsome, and insulting game I've ever played. I have no idea what Crystal Dynamics was thinking by greenlighting this, let alone approving the main storyline for this and the execrable comic on which it's based. There is such a disregard for the fanbase and the lore of the series that I struggle to see how anyone who claims to be a devoted fan of the lore and the world of Nosgoth could have ever come up with something so atrocious. What is purported to have been a love letter to the fans after 20 plus years is nothing more than a slap in the face with the glove that Laura Dern wore in Jurassic Park. Coincidentally, what she used it for is also a perfect analogy for Ascendance.
That is one big pile of shit.
As I mentioned in my review of Defiance, Ascendance was revealed to be a side-scrolling pixel art 2D action game, though I guess pointing out it's both a side-scroller and 2D may be a bit redundant. Sure as heck is an HD 2D, though, I'll tell you that. Now, at first, you might be led to think that, given some of the level design, that perhaps this was going to be a sort of Metroidvania situation where you unlock different abilities to traverse the map. See, that would have actually been a fun idea, but no, that's not what happened. This is about as generic as you can get, though I guess that's to be expected since the game is only $20, so I can't really complain that much about it. Or can I? See, this is part of the problem. Legacy of Kain as a series was never what I would consider top-tier AAA gaming, but at least it had a budget, even if content kept getting cut before release. Soul Reaver 1 is infamous for having a ton of cut content that, fortunately, was later implemented in later games with varying degrees of success. However, it's obvious that Ascendance had very little budget, and what budget it did have likely went to pay Michael Bell, Simon Templeman, Richard Doyle, and Anna Gunn to reprise their roles as Raziel, Kain, Mobius, and Ariel, respectively. As much hatred as I have for this game, at least the core of the original cast returned, though even that isn't without drawbacks. Anyway, I digress. Given the limited budget, and just how the game keeps switching perspectives, turning this into a sort of Metroidvania experience likely wasn't going to happen. This is especially unfortunate because that actually would have been a decent format. And think about it for a second. In Soul Reaver 1, Raziel is locked into a certain route through the game because he can only access certain areas after acquiring new abilities from his brothers after some good old-fashioned fratricide. For example, killing Melchiah allows Raziel to phase through certain obstacles while in the spectral realm. Killing Zephon allows Raziel to climb certain walls. So having a sort of Metroidvania setup where you unlock abilities to access new areas actually works as a concept, but none of that is here. Instead, we get very generic side-scroller action with very basic animations, generic-looking levels except for maybe 2 somewhat varied stages, predictable boss fights that are laughably easy, and a ton of cringe dialogue and plot contrivances that outright ignore and change existing lore. Combat is incredibly repetitive. Each character has one standard attack animation and a dash. Elalith and Vampire Raziel have wings that let them fly to a limited extent, which uses up lore power. Human Raziel has what are basically flame grenades. Kain has the Soul Reaver, which makes anything he hits except a boss die in one hit, as it should. And that's about it. Oh, and both Elalith and Raziel have aerial stomp techniques that trivialize boss fights and most enemies. Aside from being forced to kill enemies to get the screen to scroll further so you can keep going, killing enemies serves no purpose. No item drops, no XP, nothing. Just there to get in the way and slow you down. Oh, and it's very obvious that some movement and attack animations are copied from better games like Castlevania. Are we just going to pretend that Human Raziel's walking animation here isn't a blatant ripoff of Simon Belmont from Super Castlevania 4, except he looks worse? Level design is also crap. Is that campfire in the background? Nope. Congratulations, you just hurt yourself. Same with torches and the copious amounts of flaming oil scattered throughout stages. Enemies are generally trivial and can be taken down in 2 or 3 hits from most characters. There's a crap ton of checkpoints throughout the levels, which I'm less worried about, but it does sort of look excessive after a while. Some stages have gimmicks to them, such as this chase stage here, or my least favorite stage, where Raziel has to fly most of the time while picking up these little orbs to keep his lore filled up. The amount of air you gain each time you press the button to fly is also pretty pitiful, so you just end up button mashing through the stage, hoping to God some enemy doesn't knock you back and stop you from finishing this crap too soon. Some stages are worse than others, but I can't think of any I thought were actually fun or enjoyable. I do think the silhouette stage was kinda cool for dramatic purposes, but that was about it. The most pointless part of all the stages, though, was one where you essentially get to play trivia with Ariel and Kain based on the Circle of Nine. This boils down to 2 things. Did you find enough notes in the game that explain the different pillar affiliations, or did you actually play Blood Omen for real? I, of course, did both, and Blood Omen is an awesome game, even if it hasn't quite aged as well as some others. Oh, and for some reason, Ariel rhymes the entire time, even though she never channeled Dr. Seuss in any other title. Whatever. That's the least of my problems with Ariel in this game. Music is alright. There's a remix of Ozar Midrashim that plays in the credits, which isn't bad, but the original track is such a banger anyways, it would be hard to mess that up. That said, given everything else in Ascendance, I'm surprised they didn't screw it up and make it sound like the odd safe room music from Resident Evil Director's Cut. Not as though it could have made things worse. Speaking of other things that didn't make sense, why does the game have multiple art styles in it? Just why? We go from standard pixel artwork for the gameplay itself to really decent looking pixel art for some cutscenes, to these cheap 2D sprites for when the characters are talking, to this random Saturday morning cartoon looking stuff for a flashback, and then some form of CG animation that I suspect was intended to make it look like Blood Omen era cutscenes, or maybe Soul Reaver 1 on PSX. I really don't know. The most egregious, though, is when the game recreates the opening of Soul Reaver 1, one of the greatest opening cinematics to a game ever, and uses animation that looks like it was uploaded to Newgrounds back in the late 90s. I half expected the game to tell me that I needed to upgrade Macromedia Shockwave in order to play the content. I mean, seriously, who looked at this and said, oh, that looks perfect? That really captures what the CG was going for. Not only does Kain look like he's about to cry for some reason, but what sort of facial expression is that on Raziel when he's thrown into the Lake of the Dead? Dude looks absolutely euphoric and may or may not need to change his underwear as a result. After all, the one thing Soul Reaver 1 showed us in this scene was Raziel on the verge of climax as he was having the flesh burn from his body. And that's another thing. The game goes out of its way to recreate and revisit scenes from Soul Reaver 1 and 2, but they're never as good. Now, you'll recall that I said that several cast members returned for this, and while I cherish their performances in the original games, they leave a little to be desired here. Michael Bell is still Raziel, and it's obvious that's what he's going for, but it's now very obvious that Bell is now in his 80s.
Janos Audron, step away from the sword. It will not save you. Your final hour dwindles to its last few grains of sand. Sarafin justice has found you, and human righteousness will have its victory.
Maybe Raziel just has mild laryngitis. Kain is really the only one that sounds great in his role. The rest, either through bad direction or just phoning it in, don't quite hit their stride the way they used to. For comparison, listen to this gem delivered by Raziel when Janos Audron intervenes to save his life.
You must save yourself, Raziel. Janos! No!
You must save yourself, Raziel.
Janos, no!
You hear the original and then the new delivery? Again, who heard that take and said, that's it? That's the one that was perfect. The most egregious part of all this is the story. I'm not going to do a deep dive on this right now. I plan on dedicating a separate video to just everything I hated about what this story did. Suffice it to say, I wanted to give the new character Elalith a shot, but my expectations were pretty low. That's not to say I think the actress did a bad job. But when you give her absolute crap to act, it's still going to be crap. She did a good performance of terrible material, let's put it that way. As if it wasn't bad enough that she's Raziel's sister who never existed or was even hinted at anywhere in any game anywhere ever. She's guided by some other guy nobody cares about that's some Hilden hybrid, whatever. Now, there was the Seer in Blood Omen 2 that was sort of along the same lines, but that's about all I have to reference off the top of my head. The worst part is that both of these characters are introduced at the beginning of the game, and it's just sort of assumed that we know who they are and accept that they're important. I think the comic may have given some more background on them, but not here. In any case, boy oh boy, does this story make them important, but not in any way that was earned. Hey guys, you know these two characters that nobody has ever heard of? Well, the one guy is sort of a guide, but the girl, guess what? We're gonna make her Raziel's long-lost sister, and she's gonna be so super important and crucial to everything that ever happens ever. She's so awesome, guys. She loses a few fights, so she's totally not a Mary Sue, but she's so crucial to the lore now after only meeting her for the first time. Isn't that cool? No, it's pretty freaking not cool. Nobody wanted this or her. I get having new characters every now and again. Heck, Raziel was a new character to Legacy of Kain in Soul Reaver 1, but guess what? He was introduced and then built up as a character. He earned his place in the story bit by bit, and he didn't retroactively get shoehorned into everything that happened in Blood Omen. Like I said, separate video for all this. I can feel my dander getting up, hackles being raised, bees flying all around in my bonnet, and whatever other idioms and metaphors you want to use. The writers just disregarded what anyone wanted for the series, did their own thing, and just massacred everything about the story that we had come to know and love from the series. I said in my Defiance review that I was always hesitant about anyone picking up where Amy Hennig and her team left off in Defiance because I didn't believe anyone would do it justice, and unfortunately, that fear has come true in a dreadful way. This is the biggest monkey's paw situation I've ever experienced from a game series in my entire life. If not that, it's definitely the video game equivalent of Pet Sematary. If this is how Crystal Dynamics wants the series to go from here on, then I think the old farmer had the right idea.
Sometimes that is better.
Go play the series on PlayStation Network, buy the remasters, and yes, even play Blood Omen 2. Avoid this unholy abomination. Where are the Seraphan when you need them? Oh, right. Dead. Thanks a lot, Raziel and Vorador. This is all your fault. But seriously, guys, don't waste your time or money on this, even if it's just to see how bad it is for yourself.
Death would be a release next to this travesty.
Don't encourage them. Encourage them to stick with the previously established lore and return to what made the series great. Vote with your wallet and avoid this trash. I'll work on my story video later, starting Pragmata, so it may be a little while, but it'll get done eventually. Until then, you guys take care.